All right, Ling 201, we are going to do the second part of this exercise from the inside of my vehicle for reasons which will remain unknown forever. Anyways, the second part of this is Esperanto. So the first part of the second part is about derivational and inflectional affixes, and because I haven't talked about those in class yet, I'm actually going to skip this, and we'll do this for the second set of practice exercises for this upcoming Friday. What I want to talk about for now, relatively briefly, is the language Esperanto. So this is the first of basically a set of morphological analysis problems where you get a set of data from a language that you may or may not know, and you try to figure out how it works morphologically based on how you translate things from that language into English. So Esperanto, we're going to start off with this language because it's not a natural language. It's what is called an artificial language, or maybe a constructed language that was invented by this guy Ludwig Zamenhof in 1887. This is actually not the very first constructed language or artificial language. The first one is called Volapük, which, I'll talk about a little bit more later. And that was a language that was created a few years before Esperanto, basically by a language nerd who just thought it was fun to create a language. And then Ludwig Zamenhof kind of like took that idea and spun it in a way that the idea was such that he wanted to make a language that was really easy for people to learn, so that maybe this would become a universal language. We could all speak the same language, and then, it'd be easier for us to understand each other across like language and cultural boundaries. I guess that's a noble idea in general. It didn't really play out the way that he hoped. Most of the languages that he based this language on were Western European languages. He was himself Polish, I believe, but you can see influences of a variety of other European languages in this data set. A lot of people have learned Esperanto over the years, most as a second language. There are a few people apparently who speak it natively, if you can believe that, most of whom are found in southern France, I think, where apparently this idea has really caught on, such that they speak to each other in it. But if you are a speaker of one of the European languages that Ludwig Zamenhof kind of got inspired by to design this language, this should be pretty easy. If you're not, it might not be quite as easy to recognize the words, but you can still kind of figure out how it works out morphologically pretty easily, I think, which is why we're doing it now. Okay, so with that intro, what we want to do is figure out, like, how does the system work? It's an artificial system, and it's really regular, which is nice because we can rely on it consistently. So the first part of this problem set asks you, what are the morphemes that correspond to the following lexical categories and concepts? So for nouns, basically the way you can get this to work is to go through this and say, well, what's a noun? So like bono means goodness. That's a noun. Go through this. There's another word, mother, which is patrino in the language. That's a noun. Teacher is a noun, so that's instruisto. I'm going to do 4 of these, maybe 5. So patro is father. That's another noun. If you keep going through all of these and find all of the nouns, you may notice a pattern such that every single one of them ends in O, no matter what. And in fact, the word Esperanto itself ends in an O. Esperanto means hope in the language Esperanto, so that is a noun as well. Every single noun is going to end in O, like that. We can do the same thing for verbs. That's kind of once you see that first trick, the rest become relatively easy because you know that you can kind of look for the final sound in each word to give you a clue about what's going on in it. So did I lose my highlighting? I guess I lost my highlighting. Anyways, the word porti is to carry, so I'll highlight that one. All the nouns here, or verbs here, are going to be labeled in the what we call the infinitive form in English, which is like to carry, to instruct, so on and so forth. And I guess I only have 2, but both of them are going to end in I, or the sound E in the language. Porti and instrui. I don't know a whole lot of other Esperanto verbs other than that, although I did once upon a time study some Esperanto just for kicks, as many linguists have done. Let's look for some adjectives. Difficult is an adjective. Easy is an adjective. So malfacila is difficult. Facila is easy. Pure is an adjective. It's pura in the language Esperanto. Good is bona, so on and so forth. I think you may have seen the pattern already, but the final sound in an adjective in Esperanto is always going to be a. And then we have a couple of different adverbs in the language. I'll get rid of that highlighting. Like badly is malbone, easily is facile, and well is bone. So all of these are going to end in the letter E, which is pronounced as A in Esperanto. So hopefully that's easy enough for you to pick up on in doing these problems. And that covers basically all of the forms in terms of how they end. But there's also a couple of other morphemes involved, which give different concepts. So if the feminine, I'll give you one example so we can contrast like the word mother with the word father. So mother is patrino and father is patro. I guess I could have done this. Should I be stereotypical and do this blue and pink? Why not? So something like that. Yeah, so what's the difference there? Patro is the word for father, and then you add this in form, this in morpheme to get the feminine version of father. So yeah, this is from 1887 or whatever. It's a long time ago. It's before feminism had as much of an influence as it does now. So a mother is basically a female father in the language. Another example we can look at is portisto is porter, one who carries your bags, and portistino is a female porter. So that has the same pattern, right? It's always nice to be able to show that it's a regular process, that it happens not just in one form, but in a variety of forms across the language. But basically, the way you create the feminine is with this in morpheme. And you can kind of think of that as an infix if you want to, if you're starting with like patro, and then you go from there to patrino. Yeah, maybe. But another way you can look at it is that the root form here is the PATR part of patro, and then you add that on to, you add the O onto that to create a noun. But before you would do that, you would add the IN to it as a suffix before adding the O to create a mother as a noun, and just the O determines that it's a noun as opposed to like an adjective. So I'm guessing, I don't know for sure with Esperanto, but patra would probably mean something like paternal or fatherly, something like that. Yeah. Anyways, I'm digressing a little bit. How do we get the opposite? What's that concept? And you have to kind of infer this a little bit in this data set, but there's a couple of cases where we can pick on here. So we got facila, which means easy. Yeah, so we'll just highlight that one. And you can contrast that with malfacila, which means difficult, or the opposite of easy. There's another example over here where bona means good. That's another adjective. And we've got, well, a couple of different cases. So granda means big. Maybe that's easier to see the pattern. And malgranda means small. So for some reason, big is the default there and small is just the opposite of big. But it works the same way. And I think you can kind of infer bona is good, bone is well, and malbone is badly. So in every single case, when we get the opposite, we add the prefix mal to it, right? Yeah, that means just the opposite of good. But bad is the opposite of good. I'm in favor of that. The default is good. It's Esperanto after all, right? It's a language of hope. Anyways, how do we say purity in Esperanto? Well, we've got this one form, pura, which means pure. So this is the adjective form. In English, we add a suffix to pure to create a noun out of an adjective. But like I said, you can kind of just take pur as the root here. And then the a part of that is the adjective part. So if you want to create the noun form, then it's just adding an O. So that's all the only change you have to make in that particular case. Bad, we talked about badly, as in like malbone. We talked about good, which is bona. Bad is just the opposite of good, so it's malbona, right? It's the adjective form because of a. It's bon is the root, which is good, and mal is the opposite. So the opposite of that adjective. And then a female teacher. Lastly, got to find the word teacher to get me started on this one. Instruisto, right here. And as we've seen before, for the feminine form of a verb or of a noun, you add that in before you add the O. So just looks like an infix, but it's really just the first suffix being added on there. But it's instruistino is a female teacher. Yeah. Right. So I think that is all I'm going to say about Esperanto. Other than the fact, I'm going to give you a little video clip, which I normally play in class. I think we're done with the exercise for now. Hopefully you got the same answers. I do have a little video, which I'm going to add, and then if YouTube doesn't like it, I'll just have to cut it out. So if it seems like the video ends here, that's why. But there is one and only one movie in the history of the world which has been made in Esperanto, at least a feature film, as far as I know. And it's a Gothic horror film from the 60s in black and white, starring, of all people, William Shatner. So I play this in class so you get a sense of what the language sounds like. But the funny part of it is that William Shatner, as you may know, is Canadian, and in fact he comes from Montreal, on top of being Captain Kirk and all that other stuff. But he speaks the Esperanto in this film with like a French accent, which is not the way it's supposed to be pronounced. So just take this all with a grain of salt, which you knew already because it's William Shatner, right? But here we go. This is about a 30-second clip from this fun little film.
Chester, dolce. Dimmi det Chester vem, che tu ricci con havas kurz provon.
The aspecto estas clipona.
Fresche pure aero revivigismin.
Fiai oculo estas clarai.
Dum la lastai tre noctai mi est ebre dormi, sans audi tondron, sans songi pri bataloi.
All right, so I'm going to leave it at that. You don't need to nasalize vowels in Esperanto, but I guess if you can if you want to. If you're William Shatner, you can get away with whatever. Okay, so that's it for these practice exercises. We'll talk about this first part, the derivational and inflectional affixes, when we go through the practice exercises for next week. And that's coming up in a few days, so I hope you give those a shot before Friday. All right, see you then.